All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So let me give you an official welcome, Jeary Payne. I'm so excited you're here. This is so fun for me. So exciting for our audience to get to hear from you. I know you know, but I'm going to let the people in the room know. I got a lot of love for this man. He's an incredible human, deep compassion, huge heart, and truthfully, probably one of the coolest, and I mean that in the full sense of that word, like coolest human around, and he knows it. He's smiling because he knows it. So I want to welcome you all here on behalf of our Black Student Union, who has put together this incredible event, the Living Library, an opportunity for us to hear stories from one another, and to listen and to learn something about the people around us. And so we have abundance of gratitude that you would share with us today, Jeary. Excited that you're here. I'm juggling a couple screens, but I want to give your stellar formal introduction. So let me read a little bit about Jeary. Jeary Payne is an artist and an educator. He received a bachelor's focusing on music and business from ASU. A native of Arizona, prior to moving to New York to pursue a career in music, he spent 3 years as a program advisor at Mesa Community College, Thunderbirds, where he helped to manage various aspects of student life and leadership related to programming. Upon relocating to New York in the spring of 2015, he became active in the city's art scene, first as a performing artist and eventually as a teaching artist, team mentor, and program manager for Urban Art Beat, a nonprofit organization that increases youth literacy and leadership skills through creative collaboration in the arts, infusing elements of hip hop and social justice into his classroom curriculum, a capacity he served in until 2018. So excited to hear more about your story and your work, and I'm going to pass it over to you. You're on mute.
There we
go.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Before we get started, do you all mind if you all kind of like just humor me for a moment? I know some of you all have your screens off, so I'm going to trust that you are doing this in your comfort of your digital screen. So this is something that I like to do in my programs back home in New York. If you all can take your hands, stretch them out to the side like this, all right? And then on the count of 3, palms facing inward. On the count of 3, we're gonna clap our hands, we're gonna hold them closed, all right? So 1, 2, 3, clap, like this. You know, keep your hands closed until I say stop. All right, you're gonna rub until I say stop. So 1, 2, 3, rub, 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 stop. All right, you feel the heat, you feel that warmth. It's because the human body naturally creates energy. And so in the spirit of positivity and positive energy, I want to set the intention for this morning and kind of bring that energy into this digital space today. Is that all right with you all? All right, sweet. So before we kind of get started, I spent the last couple of weeks kind of thinking about our story and like what is that story? And so, you know, if you all wouldn't mind, I'd like to read something from a journal entry of mine that I wrote 5 years ago as I, you know, left Arizona and moved to New York. And so first I want to show some images. So this is an image of me freshly. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see you. We can see it. Yep.
The picture?
Yep.
All right. So just a few words to kind of set the stage. I kind of want to ground us first. Today marks a month that I've been here and away from all traces of normal and comfort that I've grown much accustomed to over the last 10 years of experiencing life in Phoenix. I know it's been a month because my Metro card has expired and now requires another purchase of $113 to sustain my ability to travel throughout the city on an unlimited cycle of fares until the next month comes. I'm here, and I mean, I'm actually here, living and breathing, freezing, but most of all, I'm here dreaming. I now exist in a world of my own doing, and of course, God's. And this has become my version of the Matrix, this dreamlike state that I'm in due to years and years of waiting and thinking and creating and even crying and some dying along the way just to make it to this point. However, this is very real. A slight chuckle I often lend to myself as I move from one location to the next on this vast grid they call an island. I laugh because this is a bit surreal and still to me, and for all I know, I may feel this way for some time to come. I gave it all up to be here. I gave up my job with its security, its benefits, its direct deposit hitting my Chase account every 2 weeks. I gave up friends and family, students and coworkers who over the span of 3 years feel more like loved ones. I gave up blooming relationships that had the potential to bear fruit. I gave up earthly possessions, my TV, video game consoles, my coveted shoe collection of retro Air Jordans, and many things I truthfully never really needed. I gave up my car. Her name was Candace, this beautiful red Acura with the letters fresh spelled on the back. I gave up my ability to visit my mother's grave, and now wishing that I had spent a little bit more time doing so. But that which I have gained in exchange is, in fact, far more exciting and liberating. I've gained the freedom and the ability to choose my own way, to alter my course and manipulate the trajectory of my future. This, however, is not without some cost, but I know that this feeling in the pit of my stomach tells me that this is where I'm supposed to be. I was not given a chance, but it was a chance that I took for myself, and that has made all the difference. So that is one of my journal entries that I found recently, and I haven't read it in some years, and I wrote that February 17th, 2015. It was a month after moving to New York. And so these are some of the first images of me first being in New York, being in the cities, Times Square, the lights. And it's really, I think, exciting even now, kind of reflecting back on it. But I kind of want to even go back further in the story. My mother passed away in 2011 from breast cancer. And I believe, there are experiences that we have in our lives that move us, that shift us, right, that stretch us, moments that anger us, moments that bring us joy. But I do believe that all these experiences are meant to push us closer to who we're supposed to be, and even where we're supposed to go. And so, my mother's passing was really one of those first great catalysts for me in my life at that time. And and so in response, I wanted to pick up and move 2,500 miles across the country and, pursue these dreams and aspirations that she always knew that I had. I would often say that my mother thought of everything. When she passed, I remember spending some time with my father, driving in my small town that's 3 hours away from Phoenix, 90 minutes south of Tucson, about 15 minutes from the border of Mexico, called Sierra Vista. It is a small town of 58,000 people, very different from life in Phoenix. And I remember driving down one of our very few highways, and I look over to my right, and there is a mortuary home called Hatfields. And I remember asking my dad, why didn't we have mom service here at Hatfields? And my dad said, well, your mother said that one time you're driving by, and she said that you remarked how you never wanted to attend the funeral next to a Golden Corral. And it just really stuck me, right? That she would remember that conversation in that moment. Like I said, my mother thought of everything. There is a military cemetery in town. Both my parents were in the Army. Well, my parents worked on a military base, and they would have to drive by the military cemetery every day on the way to work. And I remember asking my dad, hey, how come mom wasn't buried in the military cemetery here in town? Well, my dad said, well, your mother didn't want me to have to pass by her grave every morning on my way to work. Like I said, my mother thought of everything. And one thing that I think about to myself as it relates to her and her passing is that my mother knew who I was long before I did. And I believe that her leaving this earthly plane, I feel as though she thought that as long as she was here in whatever state that she was in, I'd never leave. And I don't say that to say that, she decided to just up and go, I'm out, I'm done. But I do know that my mother was very tired and she had fought a valiant fight. But I do think that she knew me well enough to know that if they could have prolonged her ability to be here and stay here, I would have stayed. There's no way that I would move and be anywhere far away from my mom. And I think in a way, she freed me and wanted me to go off and do the things that I promised her that I would do. And so between 2011 and 2015, I prepared myself for, the great expansion of moving across the country. I would have left immediately, but my father asked me to stay, to spend a little bit more time with him. And so I did. And so, I went on to work at Mesa Community College, which is this incredible experience that is such a big part of who I am. I'm a graduate of Mesa Community College. It really is a home for me, and it helped to shape a great deal of my outlook in the world and even how I see and view myself. But it came a time between being a performing artist, traveling across the country to Atlanta, performing at one of the biggest hip hop festivals in the country, to performing in Hawaii at a shoe festival out there. And I remember coming back home from one of these festivals and talking with my students who helped to create programs and events and festivals on campus. And every day I've always talked to my young people about, make sure that you chase your dreams, right? Nothing done without passion is ever done for long. And I arrived at this place where I started feeling like, well, how can I continue to come to work every day and tell my very students to do the thing that moves them the most, 110%, if I myself was starting to feel like I was only doing it at a half pace. And so that was that really difficult decision to make that transition, as I, detailed in my journal entry, to move across the country. And so the year leading up, I prepared myself, right? Because I knew New York was hard. It was going to be, this hard, tough experience. So, I moved out of what I felt was a very luxurious apartment, off of the 202. It was beautiful. I had carpeted indoor floors. There was a trash chute at the end of the hallway, had an underground parking. I loved it. Right. And I moved into a very small 1-bedroom apartment. I canceled all of my cable, all of the, the special HBO channels, because I knew I wouldn't have access to it. And I spent that year saving up money, preparing for this really big move. And as I said, right, I sold my car that I loved very much. It's no longer here, unfortunately. I sold all of my Jordans because I felt like I needed to dedicate myself to this actual cause of going and doing this new thing. I got rid of, my PlayStation, my Xbox. I kind of regret that now, but but that was also part of wanting to make sure that there was nothing that was going to sidetrack me when I made this transition. I moved to New York in 2015 with no job. I had $10,000 in my pocket, but I had a place to stay. And I moved during the coldest winter that I can even think about. And I specifically moved during the winter because I thought to myself that, well, anybody can move somewhere nice when it feels dope outside, when the sun is shining, right? Anybody can do that. But I felt that if I could physically weather the storm, then I know that I could mentally and emotionally and spiritually weather the storm. And so, and when I mean cold, I mean, I experienced my first -1 degree winters. I mean, like we walked outside to get pizza. By the time I got back to my apartment, the pizza was cold and frozen, right? -1 degrees. And so these are, some of those, the gloves I have on here are actually not warm enough gloves. This is all Arizona clothes. But that was all part of the design for me, was making sure that I was as prepared as possible to move to this new place and experience whatever it was that the city had for me. As I said, I had no job, but I had this idea of what I wanted to do, and that was perform. I wanted to continue my music career. Here's the thing that I've learned over the last 6 years is that dreams will change, and they often do. And because of that, we have to leave room for improvisation. I've realized that your passion, for me, music is a great passion of mine. Your passions are not always your purpose, but your purpose can become a passion. And that is something that I have learned. And over the last 6 years, I found that, well, music is this thing that I went to school for, and that I love performing and being on stages, and something that I still get to do. But what I realized is that I just enjoy telling stories. in whatever medium or facet that came from, right? For a time, I had a podcast that I was able to do, to talk with journalists and artists and educators, because I just wanted to tell more stories. Somewhere along the line, I was able to start working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's a very long story. I'll give you the truncated version. But the largest art museum in the country, which still at times 3 years later still feels very surreal that I get to work in this building. And I'll show you a little bit of, in one of my slides, kind of what some of that work looked like that I get to do. Where I get to, talk about works of art and talk with young people and talk about culture and community and bring these things together. And how working at the museum is one of the first times where all of my individual passions kind of came together, and how all the different jobs that I've done, the different experiences that I had kind of led to this culminating point. As Kim read in my bio, I was a teaching artist for a time. I was in the classroom. We were talking about hip hop. We're talking about social justice. We're talking about gentrification. We're talking about how all of these things that we experience in our real life, how they also impact us through music and art, right? And so during that time, I call it cutting my teeth and learning about New York, but also learning more about the things that I'm actually interested in. And that was being with young people and helping them to expand and explore their visions, their dreams, and their ideas. And so through that, I was able to gain this experience of teaching. Through that experience, I was able to apply for a job working within an art museum, talking with a population, again, of teens and young people. And so that is something that I'm still doing, but during that time, I've also expanded more on, well, what does it mean to tell more stories? And photography for me is something that has become a great part of that story. For myself, is being able to document and preserve the experiences of the community that I live in, which is Brooklyn, which is predominantly and largely portions of Black community, to which I've never lived in before, where everyone in my building looked like me. And everyone in the community, from the streets to the bodega to the train, looked like me, and they spoke my language, and they moved and swayed in a particular way. This was new for me. And so how could I live in this community, be a part of it, and not take from the community? And so photography was a way that I found that I was able to do that, was preserving the neighborhood, preserving its monuments, preserving its people. And that is how I have tried to give back to Brooklyn and to New York as someone who is a transplant. And while I may not take up space in the same way as we talk about structures of gentrification, but I am taking up space because I also benefit, right, from some of these structures. And so for me, as I've worked to build community within New York, it's been through arts, it's been through working with the community itself. And I often say, not Brooklyn I was born, but Brooklyn I was formed, is because the work that I've done in this community has really helped to shape me and shift me and change me in just an extraordinary way. And so when I come back and I visit Arizona, I think about the ways that I can pour back into my community here in Arizona, and that all my experiences in home in Brooklyn, I'm thinking about the young people and I'm thinking about the community back in Arizona that can also benefit from these experiences, from these communities, from these art experiences that I have had, that I didn't get to have as a child. And so that is a great deal of my work. I know that we want to leave some time, for some questions. I'm gonna go through the rest of these slides here, and then we'll kind of hop into questions if that's all right with you all. Right.
That sounds great. And I just want to remind people they can either unmute to ask their questions. We'd love to hear your voice, but also I'll monitor the chat box, Jeary, so you don't have to. I know you're navigating a lot of screens, and I'll share those out as those come in. So that's another space.
Right. So as I said, I was a musician, right? I performed downtown Phoenix and Roosevelt Road, where I really started out performing at Celebrity Theater, opening up for Miguel, who at the time, was, really big artist. He's a bigger artist now, right before he got his Grammy, right? And so music has always been a central theme for me. And so that was one thing that I was able to bring to the museum. And so question for you all. Does anyone know who anybody in these images are? All right. That's all right. That's why we're here. So the image on the right here with the brother with the hat on, this is Kendrick Lamar. One of I say, one of the dopest MCs over, the last decade. And this man right here on my right is a French painter. His name is Henri Dumier. I'm sure you're like, well, yo, what do these two people have to do with each other hundreds and hundreds of years apart from each other? Well, what I've, in my own kind of research and trying to think about ways to bring music and art to young people in a museum is, how do these things connect? Well, in Henri's time, he was considered a revolutionary. He was considered an activist. Well, Kendrick Lamar created one of the most, I would say, seminal works of his career called To Pimp a Butterfly, where he's talking about a lot of social themes, right? Race and class. Well, Henri Dumier was doing the same thing in his time in 1863, also talking about class structures, capitalism, talking about urbanization of communities. And so bringing these two, what seems like polar opposite people together and drawing parallelisms between them. So these are some of the two seminal works, like I said, To Pimp a Butterfly here, and then Henri Dumier's work called Third Class Carriage, where he's drawing this parallelism between a group of people that look disheveled, they look tired, they look homely, maybe even poor. And then in the back, you see a group of people who look affluent. You see top hats, you see scarves, right? Just this differentiation between class. And so these are these two things, these two activists talked about in their time. Like I said, this is a painting from 1863. It's still having relevance to content today. Kendrick Lamar in 2005 talking about some of the same issues. And I bring that part of my presentation because this is me in front of that work inside the museum. It's the first work of art that I ever taught from in my education museum career. And that was the lesson plan that I gave. It was called Soundtracking, and how music, hip hop, and art intersect, and how we're able to use these things as an entry point to talk about works of art. A lot of the young people that I see never been to an art museum, but something that we all have in common is music. And so using music as a way to connect through art. And so that's just an example and a sample, just the kind of work that I do. And I wanted to show these two images. One image is by Kehinde Wiley. If you ever been to the Phoenix Art Museum, I'm not sure if it's still there, but back in 2012, 2014, this image was one of the first images that I ever saw of Kehinde Wiley in the museum, of seeing a massive portrait of two Black men holding each other intimately, closely, relatively, right? I've never seen a portrait like this. And that was the time that I started asking, well, how do you even get a job working in an art museum? How does that even happen? Up until that point, I had never been to an art museum, not in this form, right? I was already out of college by the time I first visited my first art museum. And so I often talk about the cultural competency that I feel like I lacked, right? Growing up and now being in New York with all of these art institutions. And then this other image is by an artist named Kerry James Marshall, who's one of my favorite artists. And it was one of the first series of paintings of his that I saw at the Met that first got me thinking like, wow, well, maybe I could start working in this environment. Maybe they do work that feels diverse and inclusive. And he had a whole floor of just all of his paintings. And at this particular show, that was the chance meeting that I met at the time with the chairman of education who oversaw all education programs at the Met. And I'm walking out of the building and she stops me. She said, hey, can I take a photo of you real quick? And I have my hair high up in a bun, and there was a portrait of a barbershop scene, and she wanted to take my picture in front of the painting. I'm like, all right, cool. Well, who are you? And she was like, oh, I want to take this picture. I want to send it to James. I'm like, James who? She said, Kerry James. I want to send this picture to Kerry James Marshall. She knew the artist. Turns out her name was Sandra Jackson Dumont. Like I said, she was the big boss at the Met. This chance meeting happened in 2016. It happened almost a year and a half before I started working at the Met. But it was that first moment that began to even shift my experiences, and even thinking that I didn't even know that I wanted to work in an art museum. It was that chance meeting at that show, looking at this artist, that happened. And then talking about photography and telling stories and capturing people. These are images from my community, from my neighborhood. of people that either I know or don't know, living out in the world and wanting to preserve them and document them on my travels. I do a lot of film photography. And so, I oftentimes don't leave home without my camera because I never know what I'm going to see or what I'm going to capture. So these are recent images that I took during the height of the pandemic and the height of this new civil rights uprisings that are happening in, the response of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. These are images that are in my neighborhood, in my community, because these are also things that I want to preserve and remember and document. And again, documenting in the Black experience in New York. I say often that a lot of my work focuses on Black women and Blackness because I want to make more visible that which I feel is the most invisible. And so a lot of my work sounds and circles around these themes. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Accidentally turned my video off. My bad. All right. That's my presentation. That's a part of my story. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have about anything that you heard or anything that you're curious about.
As people are thinking of questions, Jeary, do you mind if I throw your website if people want to stay connected to your work, the sayjeary.com? Is that the most appropriate way for people to stay connected to your work?
Absolutely.
Cool. I'll throw that in the chat. I'm in awe of throughout your entire journey, the intentionality and the mindfulness that permeates everything in your story that you talked about. That the idea of mindfulness is such a trendy topic right now, and the demonstration and care that you have shared with us is astounding. It's been cool. Like I learned, I didn't know the connection to you moving to New York intentionally in winter to weather the hardest part of the storm, and the metaphorical connection to you being there and starting anew. That's incredible, man. That was moving.
Thank you. I think that's been, I think, the biggest part of it, right? I think that intentionality, especially, doing something that feels daunting and is daunting, something that is unknown. And I think, for me, I had a lot of anxiety around it because I just didn't have the data of what New York was going to be like. But I planned as much as I could and prepared as much as I could, but I left myself open to the experience. And that's that part I talked about just leaving room for improvisation.
Yeah.
And so for you all that in the room, I'm curious about, if you are comfortable sharing or putting it in the chat, what are some of the things that you all are interested in doing and pursuing for yourselves, whether now in school or, as you matriculate through the education system. Do we have any music lovers, any art lovers? Or who are you listening to right now, right? Meg Thee Stallion, Cardi B, those some of my favorites, right? What about you all here on the chat?
We're not being super interactive right now, are we? So I got a question for you to inspire us, right? So art is something that permeates your work, your activism, your personal life, right? That feels like a tool, a resource, an outlet, a practice you engage with all throughout. So I think for some of us, we get to adulthood and we've separated ourselves from art and have now put ourselves in this box that the freedom of creativity, the childlike connection to like freely create feels very out of reach, right? Like how do we get started? How do we tap into, whether that's through music or through drawing, whatever the medium is, how can you encourage us to kind of tap back into that?
I wish I had the link, but there's this really inspiring video by a young man called Kid President.
Wise soul.
Yeah. But no, really, I think even to that, I say it in jest, but I think reverting back to that childlikeness, right? I think of remembering of what it is that that moves us, and having or identifying what is that thing that moves us. You know, and how are we able to integrate that back into our lives and back into our work, right? Even working, you know, working at a college can, you know, what are the creative ways that you get to show your personality, show your identity, and infuse that into your work? And I think that's something that's been a part of, you know, my professional experiences. How do I get to show up authentically and creatively in my work? And, you know, finding those small touch points of things that do inspire me, and kind of just digging deeper into that. So for you all that are in school, you know, what's that one subject that really moves you, that you spend the most amount of time on, that you enjoy being in that class, learning the content and researching? You know, and I always say, you know, continue to like lean further into that. You know, but you also learn as much about yourself and what you don't like and what you know don't enjoy as from what you do. You know, and I think that's my best advice is you know, to find that thing that moves you. You know, the name of this, my presentation was called The Thing Before the Thing. And it's something that I share often with my young people in New York, is that this experience that you're having right now is dope, right? You're in school, or you're in this internship, or, you know, you got your first job, which all seems really dope. But it's not really the thing. It's just the thing before the thing. In that you are allow yourself to be shaped by the experiences that you're having now, because they're going to help move you and push you closer to that next big thing. And so that is that component of, yo, continue to leave room for improvisation. You know, and think that this right here is temporary, whether positive, right, or challenging, that is temporary, but it's not the thing. It's just the thing that's gonna prepare you for that next thing.
Well, I wrote your quote down. The dreams often change. We have to make room for improvisation. I'm gonna quote this. I'm gonna come up with some clever font. I'm gonna attribute it to you for sure, but it's gonna sit above my computer, because we need to be reminded of that, right? So far we go down this path, and I think so often we feel confounded by it because we've made this choice and don't have freedom. So that was empowering.
Yeah, and you know, it took me a long time, I think, to arrive there, because I was so determined to like do music, and you know, and for a while I was, like I said, you know, that's the thing about passion and purpose. I think purpose for me showed up in a really interesting way, and it started at MCC, you know, where, you know, I felt challenged by calling myself an educator. I didn't go to school for education, right? I went to school for music and business and theater, and those are the things that got me here. But it was ultimately those things that support me, right? And that made a way for me to even be where I'm at kind of today.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I could keep going. But I want to be respectful of your time. And also this space will roll over into a new session. So we're gonna get the boot here in a minute anyways. Right. But again, Jeary, on behalf of Black Student Union, on behalf of Chandler-Gilbert Community College, all its employees, and on behalf of Kim, man, I just so much love and gratitude for you. Thank you for sharing. This was awesome. For sharing bits about your mother, for sharing pieces of your art. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. Thank you all in the chat for being here and being present. I appreciate you all. Thank you all. Like I said, I'm happy to be back home and be in community with you, Kim, and you know, my Maricopa family. Thank you all so much. You all,
you're getting love in the chat box too. So,
man, thank you all.
You're
welcome. Sure. All right, y'all.